Dear professional community, dear guests, dear friends, we are going to continue our 10th International Scientific Congress, Sports, Human and Health. And I'm going to pass the microphone to Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, Professor, correspondent member of Russian Academy of Education, honorary educationalist of Russian Federation, president of Sports Federation of people with mental disorders, head of the chair of adaptive physical training of Leskovt University, Mr. Sergei Yevseyev. He will speak about terminology, law, and national targets in Russian Federation. You're welcome. Dear Sergei Ivanovich and dear colleagues, taking into account that this is an unusual year for all of us, our Congress is devoted to 125 years anniversary of our university. It is a pleasure for me to say that there is another jubilee within this year. 25 years ago, in the Russian Federation, in the premises of this respected educational establishment, we organized a new department, Theory and Methods of Adaptive Physical Culture or Adaptive Physical Training. Since then, a lot has been done. For example, we formed completely new educational parameters for such type of training. The first educational standard was developed here and approved back in 1997. In 1999, we also opened this new department, and in 2010, we organized Institution of Adaptive Physical Education, which continues functioning up to now. I would like to use this opportunity to congratulate my colleagues and also to congratulate the president of this university, Vladimir Aginis, who was the president then. Unfortunately, he passed away. He supported every step forward that we made and facilitated our successful development. The section of adaptive physical education was actively working yesterday, and I would like to show this book to you. This is Adaptive Sports, a book which is going to be provided to all the subjects of Russian Federation free of charge, to all the educational facilities dealing with this area. I suppose that this book will also be provided to this university next week. This is the book which is titled Adaptive Sports. I suppose that everybody knows the two-volume edition by Platonov, which is a logical continuation, or it's a prequel of this book, and this book is a logical continuation of the previous edition. Of course, it is devoted to sports in physically disabled people, and people with mental disorders are among them. And this is the result of our 25 years of activity. This book is also devoted to the criticism that we received while developing adaptive sports and adaptive physical education. Of course, we should mention here the issues related to international coordination, for example, our relationship with the international federations, as well as the International Olympic Committee dealing with the Paralympics. I'm going to speak about the law. I'm going to speak about the terminology, which is also within the realm of adaptive sports and physical culture. I would like to say that the criticism and skepticism is there, but it's positive, and it usually has very tangible results. If there is a convention on law on rights of the disabled people, and also the Constitution of Russian Federation that calls for creating even and well-balanced conditions for disabled people in all practices and areas of life, and sports should not be an exception. Let's open the law of Russian federations. There is a regulation, for example, if you want to include a person with mental disorder in sports, we need to follow certain protocols. And this sport is not different from any other sport, like track and field or swimming. And if we need to follow some specific protocol, this is already discrimination, because all the opportunities must be open for disabled people, just similarly to those people who live without disability. This is something that is included into the book as well. This is quite a difficult process. We have been dealing with this for 25 years, and I would like to say that once we were told, make it more transparent, make it clear how to develop physical education for mentally retarded people, for example. Some 25 years ago, we were just in the very beginning, but at the moment we can open a regulation on typical setting, for example, for disabled people. It said that physical education, sports and choreography should be done individually, according to the place where they are registered. Can you organize it? Just imagine. They need to be transported to a particular sports facility. Sports means public type of activity, and there are game sports that need particular equipment and settings. This is just to break the ice and to start the topic. And I would like to draw your attention to the following. The main vector of our effort is not within criticism. It is within the activity and steps forward that need to be undertaken in order to comply with the national targets which our industry, our branch of education, has, and which we shouldered because of the orders of Russian Federation government and our President Vladimir Putin. I have always been saying that it's been great effort and huge toil of my colleagues who started forming these regulations after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Of course, we have regulations in place, and at the moment we have new law 329, which was adopted in December. And we are always very grateful to those who developed these laws. But actually, praising these people and continuing living in these legal frames is not sufficient. I would like to demonstrate this to you clearly. I would like to start with the most difficult topic, and can I have my first slide, please? You can see that there are two approaches. Here you can see that here I'm showing just a scientific approach. This is logics. Everything should be based upon logics, because this is something that allows us to understand the basic terminology and delineate certain concepts from one another. This is the basis of correct thinking. And there is another approach which is shown on the right. Alas, this approach is far from being democratic. For example, I worked in the sports ministry for 9 years, and my position has never been taken for granted. It was always interpreted by those who were superior to me, according to their vision and their philosophy. Once I was proposing a definition, and immediately the definition should be supported by those who are superior and who have titles. I'm against this. Dear friends, we should definitely look at every situation from academic perspectives. How do we work, actually? There are two particular lines in order to understand the system, regulations, and first of all, we need to base our activity on particular system, but systems always change, and they are intertwined. A system is always based upon patterns. For example, like in a car making, there is engine, there are wheels, there is gear and steering wheel. This is a car with different parts which all come within one integral system. But there are different types of cars, like trucks, personal cars with different capacity of engines, and also women, they usually like color and design, and that's the only thing that they take into account. So classification actually can be dubious. It can be process, procedure, or outcome or result. Now, if we look at the contemporary law on physical culture, please come to read it harder. How the physical culture is interpreted. First of all, we always say that we need to develop aptitudes, intellectual aptitudes, physical aptitudes, as well as moral standards, aesthetical understanding and perception of the world, but we never speak about how it should be done. Here, we even have a shift from aptitudes to development in order to physically develop a person. This is what it says. How do we develop a person physically? By whipping? More to that, look at the target. It's a target, but how do we do it? By physical training, by physical development. So, is it a target, or is it a target or means of how to do it? All these proposals were sent to the Ministry of Sports, and they were intertwined into the new laws on physical culture and education. More to that, it is also placed on the website of our university. And zero attention is paid to this issue up to now. Now, let's look at the definition of sports. This is not a type, this is not a component of physical culture even. It's a separate area of social and cultural activity. By the way, mainly it is related to entertainment and leisure. But also it mentions the professional practices and preparing for such. Now let's look at the previous regulations. This is law number 80, which was a predecessor of law 329. So what is sports? It's a component of physical culture. Why? While shifting from law 80 to law 329, we changed it. Now I have a list of 65 basic terms and concepts within the law. And physical culture, it is 57th. Type of program, animals, spectators, controllers, are these main definitions and concepts for our industry? Of course not. You can see how many types of sports we have, and physical culture is not even described. There is a definition of physical culture or physical education, and it is actually left alone there. It's not interpreted further. Now, this is a definition of adolescent and childhood sport. It's mass or elite. Is it all about number of people who are involved in the process, or is it mass sport, or sport for the masses, for the wide sort of community? Is it something about number of people involved, or is it something about the audience involved, and also corporate sport? Is it aimed for a particular professional community, or what stands behind it? And if you look at the next slide, this is a definition of school sport. Just come to read it. Indeed, you need to change it for adolescent, and there are 3 repetitions in the wording, which is not appropriate for a definition. You can see it is highlighted yellow. It's a newer definition in the contemporary law, which really distorts the idea, because this is physical training, physical education, which is aimed at physical education. There are 3 repetitions within 1 definition. Is it a good definition? Let's continue working with it. We can continue, actually, but there will be difficulties that you will come across, for sure. Well, these are my proposals. This is quite a clear-cut definition, which is based upon definitions that come from Vasily Vidrin and Nikolai Ponomarev, who are outstanding personalities in our industry. Also Yevstafiev and Matveyev, also very good definitions. This is type of physical culture which aims at comprehensive development of a personality, both physically and spiritually. And there must be also equipment involved, knowledge, science behind it. And if you provide such a definition of physical culture, then we can move on. And what are the types of physical culture? Again, these comes from our classics, from those people who have been working within this realm for many, many years before us. It's physical education, which lies within the realm of education, not sports, because it's physical upbringing and physical education in one. So these are the proposals that come from me. I suppose that these types of adaptive physical culture should be included. Also, we should speak about classification sign, which should be based upon the needs and requirements of this or that physical culture parameters.
Of course, we view also the adaptive physical culture because it was specifically developed for handicapped people or disabled people. There is no definition in the legislation, but we still are working at it. Once again, sports, we know that this is a competition and training for those. There are other factors as well. Here are the preparation, which might be technical, physical, but this preparation, it not any longer refers to the sports, but only to physical education. We cannot classify the tables, for instance, as wooden tables or metal tables and red tables. This can't be done. So we have here the most egregious violations of simple logic. If we take age, for instance, let's take the Gto program, which is meant for people from 6 to 70 years old. It encompasses a very wide range of people, and their role in physical culture and for sports. And this is normal when it has one significant distinction that makes it unique. And then we can start splitting it to many elements. But from the law, you cannot find a definite and clear-cut definition which will help us to pursue the national goals which were formulated by our president. We cannot replace physical culture with sports because, for instance, if you took a 6-year-old kid or a 70-year-old senior citizen, do they really need sports in the way that the law understands it? Yes, there may be different kinds of physical activity, of physical training aimed at the healthy lifestyle. And this is what we really can do, but we've got to choose the proper terms for the legislation so that it could serve as a guidance, as a manual for people who will plan sport and physical culture events and will understand what they involve. But as of now, there is no clarity in these definitions and explanation. Of course, we can still follow the rules, fulfilling all the provisions of the law as it is in existence now. But all these definitions and attributes can bring us nowhere. We have to amend the law so that the legislation could be made clearer and more helpful to those who have dedicated their lives to this. From time to time, I still hear appeals from everywhere that we have introduced bachelordom, discarding the specialty training like it was before. But we've chosen the market economy instead of what we had earlier in the Soviet times, when state planning authority gave us proper figures of who we train, and that was a government plan to train the specialists, and it was presupposed that the government authority knows better what kind of specialists we know and who do we have to train and what for. The accent in our education now has been shifted to other things in education. We can still train specialists like it was in earlier times, but this kind of training will not be in demand on the market. Both education and sports, they are a part of a whole system of social relations. they are tied up with everything that exists in the society, and the whole system of legislation, of laws, the mentality, they cannot be adapted from other countries. Sports, especially sports for disabled persons, it has to be special. Again, an element of culture, but we cannot either go back for the Soviet Union experience or to go abroad for samples we would like to follow. We have to do it on our own, and we'll have to go our own way, trying to move ahead. And we have a working group that will have amendments to the legislation about the sports for disabled persons. These amendments will be developed by our work group. I think that there is no other way, because what we have now has got to be corrected. Sooner or later, we'll go back to what logic dictates us, but not towards what our superiors tell us. I was shocked when President Putin reacted towards what he had instructed his subordinates to do with the miners' wages back in 2010. They reported that everything was done and everything was okay. And now, 11 years later, it has been proven that nothing has been done, and what was done in the wrong way, not in the way that the leader of the country outlined and wished. For 10 years we were following the route, and then suddenly there was a stop command about face, and we started marching in the opposite direction. There are sure to be questions to Sergei Petrovich from the audience. Professor Kostyuchenko, it is not so much a question, but I would like to start by congratulating Sergei Petrovich that his voice is still loud, even after that severe illness. However, you were quoting various regulations and laws, but you know, laws and legislation, they are written by various people, sometimes not very competent on what they are doing. I think that your position is not so invulnerable. You have demonstrated today that science and legislation may be things different. One of the indicators of the practical importance of our research is when our research becomes legitimate, that our research and its outcomes are approved by everyone and are taken as guidance for practical implementation. Of course, when we speak about the sports for disabled people, we understand that, for instance, administration of various medical preparations for the athletes, we understand that it cannot be tolerated in general, but with disabled people, the situation is different. They have to be taken the drugs that are prescribed to them. So we have to follow the rules, the existing rules, but to do it with a view towards practical things. Legislation is one, the government is another thing, and science is a third thing. Because we cannot but follow the rules which have been written specifically for us and given the power of the law. Your humble servant has written 10 papers on these issues, trying to put the legislation and terminology onto a sound basis. I was trying to convince people to prove that I was right, but we cannot ignore the law. There are more questions. Dear Sergei Petrovich, above all, I would like to thank you because you have brought us back to our major event, the 125th anniversary of our university, and you have shown the connection between the work by Peter Leskoft and what we are doing today. Also, I was very interested in your interpretation of the methodology of legislation and methodology of interpretation of the terms used in our regulatory documents. Might be the earlier educational practice, specialty training, might be it could be again returned to our syllabi and curricula, and they could easily be built in the market structures. We know that good specialists will be in demand everywhere. And our idea in the 90s was that they could be built in the world economic order. In 99, I wrote a book which was titled Physical Culture and Sport, Problems of their Development in the Russian Federation. This is what I thought at that time about the place of sports and physical culture in the life of peoples. And we have then prepared 4 standards involving practices of physical culture and sports. And the idea was to make it a part of the large-scale practice and not to shove it onto the periphery of our interests. We have started picking up the subjects and sciences from other groups of students. You know, there is a profession of sports organizer, those who can organize various events, festivities, holidays, and there could be 8 specialties which could be taught at our university. And these specialties could well become practicable in those times. But the further development, unfortunately, it didn't receive any further development, but I prepared 10 addresses to the government, which were signed by the Minister of Sports, Mr. Mutko, so that training in the field of culture and sports could well find its place in our curricula.
And now it's my pleasure to say that we have a dispute within the system of healthcare on the recent versions of standards for rehabilitologists. As basic training program, you probably know what it includes. Adaptive physical culture. Training within this realm, with a professional development to follow. So they accepted us, they recognized us as a special field. In all educational facilities of Europe, I would say, there are separate departments for physiotherapists, kinesiotherapists. We in Ukraine, Belarus, we call this field rehabilitology or recuperation specialist. But in Bulgaria, in other Eastern Europe educational facilities, they all train this type of specialist because there is a different sort of training with anatomy, for example, with studying anatomy, and a person can change. You can choose, actually, this particular field. Sometimes we stumble over stupidity from heads of regions in Russia, like inclusion, for example, inclusive programs. There are 3 regions who stopped all the correction facilities for the blind and visually impaired children and just included them into the regular educational facilities, which is, of course, a form of stupidity. Visual impairment can be very severe, and it's a choice of a parent whether to send a child to specialized school or to a normal school. They're just in comprehensive schools, and schools are not ready to accept them. The teachers are not trained. The facilities are not equipped enough. So this is just a good example of how stupid all these decisions can be. We don't need specialized education, sports facilities in every city. 1 for a district, and also as a methodological center. And again, if you organize too many of them, they will be designated only for disabled people. And again, inclusion will be stopped then. And indeed, dear colleagues, any other questions? Indeed. You provided us with a whole range of different concepts. And I would like to ask about the last slide, which is about efficacy. And I have the following question. If you are in sports, and we can speak about efficacy and about results, then within all the concepts that you provided us with, whether you came across a parameter that allows us to assess efficacy of physical education, physical training, and so on. So efficacy here can be assessed as well. What are the parameters of doing that? Of course, I came across this. We come to think about it quite a lot, because this slide, it was borrowed from the documents which are regulations at the moment, but there are efficacy indicators as well, which also is trenched into the strategy of development up to 2030. It is efficacy of including number of people involved, percent, and so on, and different type of physical activity according to the age groups. Of course, 80 years has a different aim, not to be a burden to the family. We need to take into account all these concepts. We should not be abstract speaking about sports. Excuse me, I suppose I have already overcome my time frames. Thank you very much for raising the scientific platform and also for turning it into a good discussion. This is absolutely great, because this is the main direction, and our main idea is to have a discussion, because this is a discussion platform. We are going to continue our plenary meeting, and we shall pass the microphone to a candidate of science, or PhD, professor of Faculty of Sports and Physical Culture from the Novi Sad University, Patrick Drid. He will speak on the psychological effects of weight loss, rapid weight loss in combat sports. Patrick is not available, and there will be a substitution. Nemanja Lakicevic will be the speaker instead of him.
Okay, I hope you can hear me well. Good morning, dear Chair, dear Scientific Committee who made this possible. I would like to thank you on behalf of my research team for allowing me to speak on this issue. On behalf of my research team, I'm very honored to present our recent work, which deals with psychological effects of rapid weight loss in combat sports, and it's a systematic review that we have conducted. So just briefly before, sorry, my slides are not working. Okay. Just briefly before going into the depth of the study, I would like to give a quick background about myself. I was born and raised in Serbia. I've been living in Serbia until high school, and then after high school, I moved to US, where I played collegiate basketball and also got my degree, bachelor degree in exercise physiology. Afterwards, I moved to Germany to get my master's degree in physical activity and health. And currently, I'm a last year, third year PhD candidate at the University of Palermo, Italy. So rapid weight loss has been a central theme of my PhD work. And as you can see, we have published many papers on this issue in very good journals, and we continue to do so. These are all the papers that have been accepted. And this paper was just accepted a couple of days ago. So before going into depth of the study, I would like to just set the record straight and define what rapid weight loss is. But essentially, in the context of combat sports, rapid weight loss is defined as a 5% weight loss achieved over 5 to 7 days, or even less in some cases. And available literature has already eloquently described the methods to induce rapid weight loss, which is primarily done by dehydration, but includes methods such as food and fluid restriction, training in rubber suits or plastic suits, frequent sauna use, fasting, and even taking laxatives and vomiting. Not surprisingly, and unfortunately, this approach has led to several deaths in the past. In particular, 3 wrestlers in 1997 died in US due to the dehydration. And abduction has shown that these 3 deaths can be directly associated to rapid weight loss techniques. Since that event, a number of different studies have been published on this matter, delineating acute and chronic consequences. Among those are studies as well. And just to illustrate the methods used, I'm just going to give you a quick video of Chris Cyberg. She's an elite MMA fighter. This is a very short video, so just bear with me. Okay, going to the next slide. So even before going to the further discussion, you can see that just based on this case study that rapid weight loss induces severe psychological effects, primarily in a negative manner. So what was the rationale behind this approach? Like to many people, it would seem very counterintuitive to engage in such approach, knowing how physically and mentally demanding combat sports are. But the combat sports are weight classified, meaning in various combat sports, rules have been established in order to give every athlete a fair chance to compete in their given category, and then to promote more or less fair fighting. But the majority of the combat sports exploit this system by manipulating the weight part in the competition. So essentially, they try to have the lowest weight possible at the weight checks and then rapidly gain weight and then compete with a completely different weight than they were at the official weighting. So the sequence follows like this: rapid weight loss, rapid weight gain, or rapid weight loss, weighting, rapid weight gain, and then official combat. And the number of these events or the weight cycling processes is dependent highly on the number of the competitions per year. But we can see fluctuations in weight more or less, depending on the sport, but 3 or 4 times per year at least. Even though the weight oscillations can be very dramatic, it still has to be somewhat in a narrow range, so athlete doesn't have to lose as much or gain as much weight in a given period. So this would be a graphical representative of a typical weight cycle. We have a rapid weight loss, which we already established the methods the athletes use to do so. Then we have a official weighting, and then in between the competition and weighting, there's a period of rapid weight gain where athletes try to restore all the fluid that's been lost through the dehydration techniques, and also to replenish glycogen depots in liver and muscle tissue. And then there's an official competition, and then afterwards there's a rest and regular training. This would be one example. Notorious Conor McGregor, an elite MMA fighter. You can see him essentially before the competition, and then just before the competition. So at the weigh-in, he reduced his weight significantly, and then he gained before the fighting. Sometimes in MMA, as far as I know, the rules can be up to 30 hours from the weight checks to the competition. So what's the rationale like? Why do we conduct this study? Essentially, there is no systematic review on this matter. We know there's a substantial number of publications that deal with this issue, or the psychological effects, or the effects of rapid weight loss on psychological state, but there's no synthesis of data thus far. So the goal of this study was threefold. Firstly, we wanted to conduct a systematic review on this matter. Secondly, we wanted to determine patterns and subjective feeling during the rapid weight loss. And then lastly, we wanted to provide the practical guidance and offer future perspectives on this matter. To do so, we searched the available literature. We used PubMed, Web of Science, EBSCOhost, Scopus, and SportDiscus. More or less all the databases that are significant in our field for the relevant studies. We use previously defined search terms. We included only original studies published in peer-reviewed journals in English, and we searched the data from the earliest date possible to October 13, 2021, so very recent. We included both Olympic and non-Olympic athletes. There were no restrictions on age or gender of the participants. Studies had to elaborate on psychological state. Obviously, that was the main goal of the study. And here are the results. So we found 41 studies through PubMed, and 42 were found through the bibliography search. 16 studies were identified as relevant and were included in further analysis after applying eligibility criteria. So in total, we have the data from about 500 athletes, combat sport athletes coming from various combat sports. And I must emphasize that majority of the studies included or they used profile of mood states or PUMS questionnaire, which has been previously validated and considered reliable to assess psychological state in different scenarios. And it's been heavily used in combat sports to assess their mood. And then within a majority of the studies, the results indicated that the feeling of tension, anger, fatigue significantly increased, while a decrease in vigor was demonstrated. Also, these findings were consistent despite the heterogenic properties of different study designs. And what do I mean by when say heterogenic? Primarily, I mean to the percentage of weight loss, duration of the weight loss process, also males or females, different combat sports. But we see a very similar trend, a very similar pattern, and results are, I wouldn't say identical, but very similar. Just another quick video. so you can see how dramatic these approaches are. So when blood cannot go through the veins, you know that something is wrong. Yet she says also, she emphasizes dehydration, dehydration, dehydration. And dehydration has been considered as one of the most severe or most health hazardous or damaging approaches in combat sports. And it's been unfortunately traditionally used for ages. So as a consequence of such occurrences, a number of publications have been published on this matter in order to warn also scientific community, but the broader public as well. For instance, this paper has been published in British Journal of Sports Medicine, one of the most prestigious journals in our field. And it emphasizes the alarming weight cutting trends in MMA fighters, which is considered the worst when it comes to weight cutting behaviors. The magnitude and the severity of the approaches is just remarkable. This is my colleague Ben Crichton. I've been working with him as well. Also, our Brazilian colleagues have the similar intent in their publication. This is Guilherme Artioli and colleagues, one of the most renowned experts in the field of combat sports science. And the final remarks of this paper, I would like to give a quick summary. Acquired data showed that overall, rapid weight loss has a negative effect on the psychological state in athletes during weight cutting, at least in its transient form. But saying this, I think it will be very important and very significant to delineate long-term health consequences, not just for psychology, but also for physical health. And those studies are emerging just now. Athletes should become very familiar with the associated risk of rapid loss and the best practice to cope with these side effects of rapid weight loss, which can be very significant. Psychological effects may be particularly worrisome in young combat athletes. This is very, very, very dangerous and serious, and because we see the data where athletes, combat sport athletes, try to cut their weight as young as 4 years old. So this is very serious, and I think in this population up to adolescence, I think this approach should be completely banned in combat sports. Also, chronic health complications induced by rapid loss are likely interconnection of psychological and physical effects. So just as I was saying before, this is a very perplexed, nuanced response that's given to the body from such engaging in such behavior. And therefore, we have to look at this problem and also the solution very holistically. This is what I just said, very serious matter. Young athletes and kids, not kids, in this particular example, this is a case study of a 5-year-old wrestler who was engaging in rapid weight loss, where his father and his coach were pushing him to reduce 10% weight cut, to have a 10% weight cut before the competition. So I think this is completely ridiculous and should be completely banned. And these, I think this is to be honest with you, this is a modern or some kind of milder form of child abuse, in my opinion. A recent publication, very significant, on weight cycling in combat sport. And I mean, they said here in sports in general, but in our world, we are primarily concerned with combat sport athletes. And it's been a very, very good paper published in a very good journal. And it's talking about this weight cycling or the periods of rapid weight loss and rapid weight gain as a risk for later obesity. I would like to thank my colleagues for helping me to conduct this study. This has been more or less my research team since I started my PhD. Very international experts in their field, and we combined our team together to have excellent outcomes and excellent publications. Future perspectives when it comes to this or my PhD team, and also all the knowledge that we gained throughout the years about the rapid weight loss and associated risks. At the moment, we want to focus on children and adolescents, and therefore we have recently written a very good editorial that's going to be published, that's going to be sent for and hopefully published in Sports Medicine, one of our prestigious journals. We're going to try to push our study there. And just building up on this study, we have a systematic review that's coming up soon, almost completed, and we will decide on the journal. But this is, I just want to show you the direction where we are going towards, because unfortunately this topic is not well represented in the literature. We don't have sufficient data on many different aspects of rapid weight loss, and we should fill this gap as soon as possible to have a good knowledge of, let's say, milder transient consequences of rapid loss and the long-term consequences, and in both populations. Here are the references, and I'm open to all the questions if you have them. Thank you so much. Sorry, I cannot hear you. Just a second.
Mr. Lukashevich, are there any prospects of dealing with this issue on a legislative level?
Yes, thank you for a question. A very good question. And I like very much so that you went straight to the solution, which I admire. On a collegiate level in the United States, we have rules that have been established for wrestlers, because wrestling is very popular in US, and over there they have rules where they have a very short time frame between the weight checkings and the competition, and there's no place to manipulate so much with your weight. And also there you have to pass the hydration test. You have to what else? There's a minimal competitive weight prior to the competition year, and there are so many rules, but it has been shown as being successful. Rapid weight loss has been on the decline, but we have a very interesting paper on this matter, where athletes going from that system and competing on international level engage once again in similar behaviors as before the rules have been established. So on international levels, rules are not so strict as in US, and it's a very challenging to implement such system, because the collegiate system in US is very sophisticated and well organized, so you can control. On international level, not so much. Sorry, I cannot hear you.
Professor Ashkenazi, your question? All right, this is a kind of consolidated question. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. And I had a call from Moscow about that. Do you know anything about this issue, because it was studied in the Soviet Union times by the departments of sports physiology? Have you come across them in your research?
Okay.
works done in the Soviet Union by the physiologists, because they were also interested in this problem of weight loss and weight gain.
Thank you for a question. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of any studies published in that era. I would love to do so, and it will be nice to compare those results, let's say in the 50s, 60s, 70s to the present trends. Majority of data that I'm aware of has been conducted most commonly in Brazil, US, and UK. So the data, if you look at the search for, let's say, PubMed or Web of Science, majority of studies have been conducted in those countries. So I would love to conduct some studies in Russian athletes or Russian combat athletes. Let's make that possible. I cannot hear you, sorry.
Thank you very much. We are really very thankful for your very interesting presentation. Dear colleagues, so our session is going on. I will give the floor now to the Deputy Chairperson of the Commission of the Public Chamber of the Russian Federation, in charge of physical culture and healthy lifestyle, the professor of High School of Economics, Ms. Istagina Yeliseyeva. Dear colleagues, good morning. I am now at the Public Chamber of the Russian Federation. Here we also have a plenary session, the last one for this year, and it was a pleasure to hear the previous speaker. The subject itself was very interesting, and actually legislative regulation of physical training and sports is a pressing issue both in this country and abroad. However, there were people who were addressing the public chamber, representatives from the sports communities and organizations, and we had a talk about the research that is ongoing, and they were very much concerned about the children today who are growing fat very fast. And the idea was to restrict consumption of sweets and of junk food that they consume. Of course, sports and physical culture, they are of major concern of everyone because their outcome is healthy lifestyle. We can be attentive or not be attentive to these issues, but still every parent, when he or she sends his or her child to a sports club or society, of course they want the child to be healthy and well. Sometimes, however, these societies and clubs are managed by people who have practically no idea and no proper education, which again raises grave concerns. And now we are examining the situation in these clubs and societies. There are data from the statistical polls, that the most popular sports are now track and field events, running, and walking. The second place is taken by regular physical exercise and fitness clubs. On the other hand, there is a rise in the amount of fitness clubs here in this country. There are about 1,000 of organized fitness clubs and about 2,000 individual entrepreneurs who also are doing something in the field of fitness. So they are practicing coaches. Now, the growth usually is represented by sports halls, training rooms, and individual coaches who work for those who come to them. Now there has been the order of the Ministry of Justice, which said that there should be a very thorough accounting of accidents which have taken place in sports clubs and sections. But we do not know everything, do not know anything about accidents which take place in commercially run sports and fitness clubs. We think, though, that the number can be comparable to the one that is in the state-run facilities. Among the activities that can be classified as can be used for health development purposes, but they still they classify any facility as a health-oriented facility, even a bath or a bathhouse can be classified as a swimming pool for sports. There is sometimes a discrepancy in understanding. Our colleagues from the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education, practically all organizations, be they commercial or state-run or they should comply with a number of fairly strict regulations, though the people complain that these rules and regulations, they put a hold on the business development. But we think that it is an area socially oriented, and this means that it should be not only healthy but safe for the people who use these services. We also plan to apply to the government so that the tax rates could be lowered for health-oriented facilities who take care of our physical condition and our health. We are planning to discuss these issues first with a view to their further development and control in these educational and training potential and facilities. Our colleagues in the State Duma, many school principals in this country, they think that here the professional community should play a more important role, the sports federation, because they know what they are talking about, and they know the people who run various sports clubs and facilities. Sometimes people with a criminal background, they open their own martial arts clubs and sections, and which we cannot tolerate because this will adversely influence our children and youth. So I would like to invite everyone to join us in these considerations and discussions so that we could offer our suggestions to the legislative bodies. Dear colleagues, any questions, please, to Elena Alexandrovna? I have one question for you. Could you tell us, please, that 10% of injuries, according to the protocol that we have from the Ministry of Sports, 10% of athletes who were trained in sports schools, they are in 10% experience an injury within a year's time. How can we obtain such figures from commercial clubs and commercial facilities? They are not transparent, you know, and that brings a great concern to us. People who are injured, and it is even worse when a small kid gets injured. Sometimes they even do not understand what has happened. We must, of course, strengthen control and reporting from these organizations and facilities. If the drivers of taxi cabs have to obtain a government license to do their work, then of course those who want to run training facilities, boxing clubs, any kinds of training in sports. They must also have a proper license and fulfill all the requirements that can be put forward for his or her profession. So there are two areas which are very important. One is organization, and the second area is work with the staff, because the skills of the training staff also must be followed very scrupulously. We do not want to have any scandals associated with this. And this was said not so very long ago by the chairman of the Federation of Thai Boxing in Kemerovo, because some people, parents, were complaining about the skills and personalities of the trainers. Thank you, Elena Alexandrovna. We are going on with our session. The plenary sessions, the plenary papers which were supposed to be presented, we have run out of them, and I would like now that we listen to moderators of our working sections who had their day yesterday. So we would like to hear the moderators who are supposed to report about the events yesterday. First, section number 1, prospects of strengthening and development of international Olympic movement, Paralympic and Olympic sports, and the world movement sport for everyone. Mr. Kryuchik. Our section was not so numerous, but the presentations that were made, they have practically covered a very wide range of issues, from philosophical to applied disciplines, and even economic issues were discussed. There were 15 people interested in the work of our section who were very proactive. We had enough time for a vivid discussion. All these resulted in also outlining our future avenues for work. We think that some of the issues discussed could well find their way into the curricula or syllabi for our students. An example was the history of Olympic movement in Russia, and that could be very useful for the students to know about it. Now we plan to address the members of the Congress to provide a few considerations about the essence of this Congress, its future, and the format in which it could be staged. And we would like this Congress to be permanent, but perhaps organized a little more in a more active way. The second, we wanted to ask President of Gazprom, Mr. Miller, so that they finish construction of the children dance theater. It will be a sporting dance theater. And we had also a proposal for the next Congress. Sports activities of the human as one of the activities of man in the present day period, because a lot here depends on contemporary physical activity, an important element of the social life. Generally speaking, there were also proposals from some of the speakers. They said that the organizers have to be commended for the organization, for preparation of materials. Our session was very vivid, very interesting, and very colorful. Thank you. Please don't go away, because every session moderator receives a letter of thanks, and now I hand in this letter of thanks to the chairman of section number 1, Associate Professor Kryuchik. Please, dear colleagues, do not forget about our time frame. Try to be brief. Now the floor will go to the moderator of the section number 2, scientific and methodological provision for the elite of sport and problems of the modern sports training. Mr. Tarakanov, Professor Tarakanov. Our session, we had 20 presentations, of 25 announced. The presentations, the papers were very interesting. I would like to highlight the following by Mr. Shiyan. and his paper could be heard even at the plenary station by Mr. Stablov, Ms. Lutkova, and those papers were really well done and interesting. As for the scientific support, we decided to run this part as a roundtable discussion with participation of everyone. And also, I would like here to draw attention to the paper by our Serb colleagues from Serbia. And what I did not like is that he was advertising very harmful methods of weight loss. And we know from early days that rapid weight loss is very harmful to health. Now, Mr. Tarakanov, we will give you our letter of thanks and certificate of the participant of our Congress. Dear colleagues, I'll give the floor to moderator of the section number 3, psychological support of the modern sports, and moderately intensive physical activity, Ms. Khvatskaya. Good morning, dear colleagues. 24 applications were planned for our section, but one report could not be done because the author left on a business trip. I wanted to thank our computer service who held the fortress very reliably, and also our volunteers who rendered great support to our progress. And we worked yesterday until 6:45, and we had both active people here and about 30 to 40 people via YouTube. We decided to have a discussion on this, and the proposals were sent to the mailbox of the organizing committee, and to categorize the sections in a more in a clearer and a more rational way. In spite of pandemics of COVID-19, we think that our Congress and our section relied on the technical achievements, and we had a very good results at our section. Thank you. I think that we can, of course, follow the advice of Ms. Hladskaya, inviting the researchers both to come to us online, but we do not forbid the regular presentations and regular formats of congresses and conferences. Now the floor goes to Professor Shchedrina, Yulia Shchedrina. She represents section number 4, medical biological provisions for the sports training and for classes in moderately intensive physical activity. We heard all the papers that were announced. There were people who came from Russian cities, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Volgograd, Omsk, Yekaterinburg. The most interesting were the papers on the a lot of data were obtained from outstanding athletes, and the figures that we obtained could be used as a landmark for those who are not professionals but who would like to do better in the sports. For the next time, we would like to have a section on medical diagnosis and analysis of the sportsman, and this will help us to shape the face of the sockets and to choose a platform for online conference with a view to organizing discussions. Since we do not have any other means in that, I would like then to ask the members to provide their power with a full immersion in the subjects of our section. Dear colleagues, your remarks and proposals, please be so kind, send them to the organizing committee and we will try to sift through them. Thank you very much for your participation in our Congress and for the great work you have done in your sections. Section number 5, issues of adaptive physical culture and adaptive sports. Professor Yevseev. Dear colleagues, above all, I would like to thank the organizers for according us the best venue to be. We had some people with a special attention to the inclusive approach, and quite a lot of attention was paid to that, and our vice rector made a presentation upon inclusive training at the Pavlov Medical University. We analyzed how it is done in other colleges and universities. Fairly we had all the proposals and our remarks. We had sent our proposals into the organizing committee. We would like to thank you for your great work, for your presentation. There were many participants on the web, and the first plenary session, which closed at 3 o'clock, we had 900 people from Russia and 222 viewers from abroad. Thank you very much. Now the floor goes to the moderator of section number 6, innovative projects and best practices aimed at harmonious development of personality in the systems of physical culture and sports, healthcare, and education. Mr. Volkov. I would like to thank the organizers and especially Mr. Petrov, who agreed to host this event, our session. We had 19 papers on the session. However, one presenter was unable to come, and one presenter from Spain, he could not he couldn't go on the bed. on the web alone. The best presentations were made by Krotova about the football matches and by Mr. Volkov. We submitted our proposals for the improvement of the work. We would like to, we want to send these things to be printed in a collection of articles read at this Congress. Well, the letter of thanks and a certificate go to Mr. Volkov. Now the floor will go to Section 8 Moderator. All our participants thank the organizers and they voice a wish that the next Congress will be just on a regular basis, not using any contemporary gadgets for this. We could not change anything on the schedule because everything was very interesting. The presentation that attracted a lot of attention was the one by Ms. Lubasheva. And the presentations, though sometimes they lack material on actual human behavior, was nevertheless very interesting, and all participants expressed a hope that we keep the problem of personnel training on the schedule of this Congress. Because we would like not only to retain this Congress, but also to give it a facelift, to try to make it more interesting and more informative. Especially this is what is needed for the specialists in the Russian Federation. We would like it to compensate for the lack of scientific data. And but we are sorry that we have become disjointed from our foreign colleagues because of this pandemic. And we think that later on this cultural dialogue will help for the development of our society, and it will help to bring the best practices into our system of physical education and training so that we could join together in this. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ponomarev. I would like now to read the letter of thanks because we still have some time. The letter of thanks the chairman of the organizing committee, Mr. Shostakov, signed that. Yes, everyone has got a similar letter. The moderator of section 8, the legislative regulation of safety in sports, Professor Smirnov. Dear colleagues, I wanted to thank the management of our university, the organizers of the Congress, for giving us an opportunity to join in the organization of the Congress, and our section was legal regulation of safety in the sports. And the Professor Alexeyev also made it much more picturesque. We had there were 23 people present at the section, and several hundred were customers of internet. So the interest of the sporting community was rather strong. There were many presentations, and I would like to highlight 3 of them by Professor Kazarinova on regulation of safety in sports. One of our teachers, Ms. Borodina, who analyzed the legal regulation of doping in sports. They analyzed the practices It was very important because it was a necessary step in preparation for the contemporary stage of physical education and also to the competitions of worldwide level. And of course, his presentation called forth a very important discussion. We, of course, give our for the future Congress, the section will be titled Legal Regulations for Physical Culture and Sports. I'm also handing in the certificate of the participant and the letter of thanks. Thank you a lot. Take care. Dear colleagues, dear friends, now we go over to the procedure of adoption of the Congress resolution. You had a chance to see the draft resolution, and I suggest that we take this draft text as the basics for the resolution. Shall we accept that as a basis for the resolution? Thank you. 3 days of our Congress brought us quite a lot of new things and very interesting. In this connection, it would be correct and necessary to consider all that was new and advanced that we learned over these 3 days. This is why I suggest that the Scientific Committee of the Congress should analyze the work of the sections and remarks and replicas received for the draft resolution and complete the resolution within 2 days. And I would like also to thank moderators, managers of scientific sessions, technical services, press services, International Department of the Lesgov University. And I would like now to hand the letters of thanks for very professional work. Also, I would like our volunteers, who are an unalienable part of our Congress, the company worked very well and will hand in their certificates to Vyacheslav Sidorenko, to Daniil Tseitin, The ceremony is going on. The letters of thanks are handed over to the volunteers.
Сувенирами, рюкзаками на память о вашей работе на нашем конгрессе. И предлагаем сфотографироваться вот здесь, прямо стоя у нашего стенда. Всех тех, кто принимал непосредственное участие